is going to be an overview for the final for Module 2, the muscles. So I am going to talk about the muscles, essentially, and some of the information, at least from a physiological point of view, that you need to know about some of the processes that are going on in the muscles. Imagine that we have our neuromuscular junction here, and that's going to start out with some sort of action potential that's going to be coming down the neuron. And now you should be able to recognize what that action potential looks like. But that's going to open a voltage-gated calcium channel, which means that calcium is going to go into the cell and bind to synaptic tethering proteins. Those synaptic tethering proteins are going to be attached to synaptic vesicles, and those synaptic vesicles are going to have acetylcholine inside of them. Now, when they bind, they're going to physically shorten. So you can imagine that this is going to go boop, and then this one also already has some calcium bound to it, boop, boop, and this one is already bound as well, and so this one, boop, there's the tethering proteins, and then it'll release the acetylcholine into the cleft. When that acetylcholine gets released into the cleft, it essentially sticks around in the cleft, unless it binds to acetylcholinesterase, which will make it so that it will break off into acetic acid and choline. This is one of the ways of getting rid of it. Otherwise, it can just kind of diffuse away, or it can go back into the cell. So it can be retaken up. Normally what will happen, though, is that acetylcholine is going to bind to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, which is going to open the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. And then that is going to make it so that sodium will go in. And that means that sodium is going to go in, and that is going to open up voltage-gated sodium channels, which is going to make sodium go in, and sodium go in, and sodium go in, and sodium go in, all the way down into a T-tubule, which is going to bring it so that all of this sodium is close enough to voltage-gated calcium channels, which makes calcium go out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This is the SR. So that calcium is going to leave. At the same time as all of these voltage-gated sodium channels opening, we have voltage-gated potassium channels that are going to open, and potassium is going to go. And that potassium is going to leave the cell because of its electrochemical gradient. That was all set up by the resting membrane potential, that, if we remember, is going to be set up by 3 sodium getting kicked out and 2 potassium coming in. And potassium leak channels, which are just going to leave. And then also proteins that are negatively charged. So this is resting membrane potential here. So that's RMP. So sodium potassium pump, potassium leak channels, negatively charged proteins establish that resting membrane potential, which makes it so that there's more sodium on the outside than there is on the inside, and more potassium on the inside than there is on the outside. Okay, so we have our voltage-gated voltage-gated calcium channels opening. Calcium comes in, releases the acetylcholine into the cleft. The acetylcholine binds to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, makes sodium go in. Sodium is going to open up all the voltage-gated sodium channels, which is going to release calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. That calcium is going to bind to tropomyosin, which will move troponin out of the way on actin. So that means that we're going to have the calcium is going to move that out of the way, which makes it so that the myosin heads can bind to the actin site. So bind. After they bind, there is what is called the power stroke, and it moves. Then an ATP binds to the actin heads, or the myosin heads. Then an ATP binds to the myosin heads, causing them to release. And then it resets. And then we repeat. Bind, power stroke, ATP causes release, reset. Bind, power stroke, ATP causes release, reset. And this happens as long as this calcium is present, or as long as acetylcholine is present in the cleft. Once again, acetylcholine can either be retaken up, it can diffuse away, or it can be broken down by acetylcholinesterase. When we talk about other things we talked about in this section, there are three things. There's curare. So curare stops here. It stops the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. So it makes it so that the muscle contraction can't happen, causing flaccid paralysis. Botox snips the tethering proteins so that they can't actually go and release acetylcholine in the first place. Sarin stops the acetylcholinesterase, making it so that the muscle can't relax. So once again, curare blocks the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, no contraction. Botox snips the tethering proteins, making it so that the vesicles can't release acetylcholine, no contraction. Sarin blocks acetylcholinesterase, too much contraction. That is the physiological processes, for the most part, that we've talked about in this portion of Module 2. A lot of this you can find in the big picture in Chapter 10.